Hello, welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison and I talk about prison stuff. Today, I'm going to show you a video that I did a while back, quite a while back, with Josh Long from UMass Lowell. And we were talking about rehabilitation. There's been some questions on the channel about rehabilitation, so I wanted to sit down with Josh. We did a Zoom call, and I thought because he studied prisons, he studies programs within prisons and stuff like that, I thought he would be a really good person to speak about it. Now, I have to apologize in advance because the video quality on my end wasn't that great. I was using an old webcam. I didn't have great equipment at the time, so the video quality is kind of bad on my side of it. However, the content is great. You know, what was talked about needs to be heard. I think it's important. So please forgive the poor video quality, and, I hope you enjoy the video. But I definitely wanted to share it with you guys, and I'm sorry I've been sitting on it for a while. I didn't really know what to do about the video quality, but because it's something that needs to be heard, and it's a very, very important and significant discussion, I thought I would share it with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Here it is.
Well, my name is Joshua Long, and I'm a assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. And I study criminology is my area that I've been dedicated to researching, reading all about, conducting original research in for many years now. And the reason I got into this field of criminology and the criminal justice system is that I first started off working in children's services, and I saw just a lot of families with really bad problems in their lives. They were abusing drugs and alcohol, neglecting or abusing their kids. And then there were these sex abuse cases. And when you see things like that in your job, you always wonder, why is this happening? You know, it's not like you're a bureaucrat working for the government and you're stamping folders all day and stuff. You're seeing people's lives unfold before you, and you see these really terrible crimes against kids. And I started then also to see the humanity and the tragedy of these people's lives, that this had gone on for generations and the problems were really complex. And I was always a real simplistic thinker. And I would go to people's houses and I would think, I'm here to fix problems. Oh, I can't fix all this. This is really bad. And I would assign people or help them coordinate treatment. And I'd say, okay, if you're addicted to heroin, here's a treatment program I found in the phone book. You should go get treatment. But you have no idea if those programs work or not. And so when I went back to college to get a PhD, I wanted to be a program evaluator and see which programs actually work. And that got me into rehabilitation, corrections, and then studying prisons.
Mm-hmm. So you are the perfect guy to talk about this then. So I did not know that is how you got started in criminology, but that is very cool. I have a lot of respect for that. But since we're talking about rehabilitation, I guess what is rehabilitation? When we're talking about corrections, punishment versus rehabilitation, what are we talking about?
Well, that's a great place to start, because a lot of people, I think, see when a crime is committed that you should just instantly go to punishment, that you can punish the crime out of somebody, punish them into good behavior. And the whole purpose is to correct someone's behavior. That's why they call it corrections. And sometimes you can punish, people punish their kids, they punish their dogs, and you can coerce people into behaving the way you want, but not all the time, and not when you're not looking. And so punishment is kind of a flawed mentality. It also is impossible to really know when to stop, because let's say your kid is misbehaving and you punish them, but they keep misbehaving. Well, then you say, I'll just punish them even more. And that doesn't work. So you punish them even more. And before you know it, you've punished them, what you've crossed the line. And I feel like America did that with our prison system, is that, a little bit of punishment to coerce somebody into getting help or to hold someone accountable for a serious crime. Every country in the world punishes people, but America just went doubled and doubled and doubled, and they abandoned rehabilitation.
Mm. Do you think that America has ever really embraced a rehabilitative approach in the past?
I think that there were a few times that they tried. And when I look back at the history of corrections and how our prison system developed, and you think, but everyone in the old, like the old days, 250 years ago, they had a weird mentality. They don't really think like we do today. And you'd be a good person to consult on this because of your research you've done in theology, is that, when they had the religious mindset, they thought that they could actually make people into, like, have a moral reformation.
Mhm.
That's where the word penitentiary comes from, is that you make somebody penitent for their sins. They feel guilty and pray to God for forgiveness, and then you're born again and you don't commit crimes. And so when you look back, I think that a lot of people tried, but they didn't have the technology, didn't have the science to evaluate programs. So they just did what felt good, and then they get frustrated because it didn't work, and they just resort to punishment. But rehabilitation hasn't really been taken very seriously from a scientific perspective until the early 90s. It started to spread in America from Canada, and then ever since then it's starting to become a better alternative, because a new generation of people are kind of taking over government. As once these people who are, I see judges sometimes are 85 years old, and you think, when are you going to retire and let somebody
Right.
else get a chance? But they've got a really old fashioned mindset. They're still living in the violent crime wave of the 1980s in their mind. Like, I can punish this kid and teach him a lesson. And it never did work, and it's not going to. But there is a science of rehabilitation now. And so I feel justified in saying that rehabilitation is more effective than punishment most of the time. And even though it's not perfect, punishment certainly is not perfect. There's just almost no evidence at all that it actually is going to have long lasting change.
Right. And I think that punishment is important to a degree when you're talking about justice for victims' families and stuff like that. But when we are talking about putting a person back in society and changes in behavior, I don't think punishment really addresses that. And when we're talking about prisons, punishment versus rehabilitation, we're talking about, basically, by punishment, we're talking about sitting in a concrete cell for X amount of years. That's what we're talking about. And rehabilitation, on the other hand, how would you describe rehabilitation in contrast to, let's send them to prison?
That's a good point. Sometimes when it comes to these words, when you use them so much in research and things, you kind of skip over that. You really have to make sense of that, because a lot of people might misunderstand that when someone is habilitated, they're kind of trained how to behave. So you're raising your kid, you're habilitating them. And then the idea is that people have learned how not to behave. They've learned criminal ways to learn to behave. So being violent and aggressive, um, they learned how to, instead of getting a job and paying your taxes and being a law-abiding citizen, they sell drugs and pull guns on people, and then before you know it, they end up in prison. So the idea behind rehabilitation is that you're retraining them how to be a productive member of society. And now that's kind of simplistic, though, because that kind of goes back to a mentality of, like, I'm going to reform you, or I'm going to change you and make you behave the way I want. And so when we still use the word rehabilitation now, but it means something different. And what we mean now is, we find out what are the things in your life that are causing crime, and then we try to change them, help you address them or overcome them. Um, and that's a different model, a different way of thinking about it, because I'm not trying to force someone into behaving the way I want. That never works.
No.
People choose to do it. And a lot of people, almost everyone I ever met in jails and prisons, they don't want that lifestyle. They don't want to be there. And if they are kind of stubborn in in the mindset or the mentality, it's really because the prison system has reinforced it in their minds that they
Right.
got. I forget now from your video where you're talking about your definition of being institutionalized, um, being a little bit different than other people's. But, when you take someone away from their family, we want people to be like productive family members and there for their kids and, for their spouse. And that's one thing that kind of keeps people behaving normally in society. We take them away from that, isolate them from their kids and their spouses, lock them up with a bunch of other people who have antisocial attitudes and beliefs in a violent environment. You treat them badly. You teach them, the officers, the way correctional officers behave towards prisoners is so aggressive sometimes and brutal, demanding authority, yelling, treating people badly. Is that modeling the way that we want them to act when they get out? So if you think of it from the point of view of like the rehabilitation term, if you're going to train a child how to be a good person, and you're going to retrain this adult because he didn't get trained right the first time, prison is the worst place in the world to do that. You're teaching them the exact opposite: how to be hypervigilant, how to be violent on the slightest provocation for their own safety. Those aren't skills we want people to walk away from fights. We want them to be altruistic and nice to each other. That's what pro-social is: being kind to other people, not stealing something that belonged to someone else. But in the prison world, it's survival of the fittest. Especially now, it depends on the prison, because I've been visiting some in the New England area, and these prisons up here in New England are totally different than when I saw in the Midwest and in California or in the South. There's a lot more violence in those places, so it's hard to generalize too much. But prison is just not a good place, no matter what. You're separating them from the things that I don't know who had the great idea. Actually, I do know who it was, but it was Plato. And he said we should take people away from society if they're not acting civilized to an academy where they learn how to be civilized. And then we bring them back to society and they'll be retrained. And that idea, I don't know if it's ever worked. How can you train someone to act if you take them away from the place where they have to learn how to act? People need to learn how to get jobs, how to get along well with other people, how to be kind to their family. They need to grow up and mature. And we take them during a time of life where they're the most vulnerable to, or the most amenable to change. And we teach them how to behave in a prison environment, how to survive. That's just was never a good idea.
No. And humans are sponges. We soak up information like crazy, and we're also great at adapting. So if you take a guy whose behavior is not consistent with the expectations of a society, and you go and you throw him in a place for X amount of years with other people who don't, meet society's expectations for their behavior, they're going to learn something. But without effective programs, without effective training, as you said, what they're going to learn is not going to be beneficial to them or society.
That's exactly right. And, that's what you pointed out there is this thing, what we call in the science of rehabilitation is called the risk principle. And that you shouldn't really mix low risk people with high risk people, because you're just taking low risk people away from the things that make them low risk, and you're mixing them with high risk people. So, if you took someone who had marijuana possession and you force them into an intensive drug treatment program where people are teaching them how to make meth, that's a school for ruining someone's life. You don't want to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, you said, and I don't want to get off topic, but you said that you have spoke to a lot of prisoners and you have been to a lot of prisons. So you've traveled across the U.S. and you've studied prisons and you've done interviews with various people, correct?
Oh, yeah. And that it's been a weird journey for me to do that, because most of my prisons I visited were in Ohio, which is where I'm from and where I got my degree. So my research opportunities in Ohio were the greatest, and I could go visit jails and prisons. But I did get a chance to get out of there and visit a few I haven't gone to every state yet, but I've been to, I think, 20 states, if I can't do the math in my head. But yeah, I got to see some different regions, and learn a little bit about, and most prisons are the same. They kind of were built by the same companies, big corporations. The blueprints are all the same.
Right.
And they're kind of like hospitals in a way. So you walk in and it's the same protocols, but sometimes you walk into a place and it feels different. And I was like, man, you know, I feel like I'm someone who's not cut out for prison life at all. But like you said, when it comes to adaptation, I think sometimes, I wonder if I went to prison, if I could adapt, because I feel like I'm totally unsuited to that environment. But if it's sink or swim, maybe I would. I don't know.
I think you'd probably be all right because you have a good head on your shoulders. That's the main thing. That's probably why I did well in prison. It's not because I'm a big guy and I'm not a fast talker. You know what I mean? I'm just the type of person who keeps his cool, and I build good social relationships with people, and I try to solve problems before they get out of hand. But I think you do all right.
That's good to know. I
When
don't plan on going,
Yeah, I
from
don't think
that side, but if it did happen, I will say this, as someone who's never served, I've never even been to jail and never been arrested or anything, that I have nightmares about it. And sometimes I'll wake up in the night and I think, whoa, or I'll have a nightmare that I was in a jail cell. And I wake up and I think, oh, no, it's a mistake. I shouldn't be here. And I'm like, and I didn't even serve one day. How traumatic must that experience be for people? The shock of incarceration. Just,
oh man. And let's touch on that for a minute, because you have never served time and it's something that you've had nightmares about. Okay. And it's not just the aspect where you're stuck in a place that you can't leave for so and so many years. There are unintended consequences that come along with incarceration. So, as part of punishment, the unintended consequences that you could get stabbed, you could get raped, you could get beat up. So, with this punishment, I'm sure you've studied some of the things that go on in prisons that end up happening to people. So let's talk about that a little bit. Are you familiar with the rates of violence in the United States prisons compared to other countries? Would you say that they're more violent, or?
it depends on the region. So comparing us to places like Europe, they can't believe our violence rates. They like the gangs and the stabbings and stuff. And even if you break America down into regions, the South and California have a lot of violence. Some of the big city jails in New York are really bad. But yeah, I have done a lot of research on that. My dissertation was on the effects of security levels on reducing violence. Didn't find much of an effect there, because they don't really use security levels the way they should. They use it to punish people for minor rule infractions, put someone in a higher security level, take their freedom away, rather than to really separate dangerous people from low risk people. And so I did, I did get to study a lot about violence and interviewed people, talked about violence. When I went to a prison in California, they said, you have no idea when it's going to go down. Anytime it could just go down, and you separate by race. It doesn't matter if you're in a gang or not. And I just can't imagine one thing, I would like to ask you is, when I study the violence, I always get to this bureaucratic mindset, like, what can the warden do about it? How can he have a better management philosophy to fix this problem? And then I take a step back sometimes and I think, you're mixing a bunch of guys together. They're going to bump into each other. Some people, are not going to have, a level head, and violence is going to break out. Then you get the race hatred between people. You get the gangs, and then just personal attitudes and problems that people have, just one with another, even their cellmates. And you think violence is always going to happen in this situation. We've just put people in a pressure cooker. What do they expect?
Right.
So
For me, when I look at what the warden could do or something like that. I would go back to something that you said earlier. You don't want to train people, is what you said. You want them to choose to do something, right? So I think a lot of violence in prison could be avoided if people could learn that there's a better way, but also see the value in a better way. In order to choose something, in order to want something for yourself, you have to value that. And if we could find a way to teach people the value of something, to teach people the value of walking away from a fight, or to find a better means of conflict resolution, that would be huge. Guys get in gangs for different reasons. It's not the same story across the board. Prison violence occurs for a number of reasons. A lot of it is motivated by money. When you're talking about smoking or contraband of whatever sort, or gambling, and people don't pay their debts, so there's violence, right? But there's a better way. It doesn't have to be like that. I wasn't big into gambling when I was in prison. I had legitimate means of making money. I had my incentive level 3, which allowed me to have hobby craft items in my cell. I would make jewelry, and I could sell my jewelry to staff members and people in visitation. And so I had ways of making money legitimately. I had stuff to do with my time that made me feel good, aside from drugs and contraband of other sorts. I could go play guitar. I could go be involved in positive things. But a lot of people, and even the college, you said before, a lot of my students didn't know you could go to college in prison. Other prisoners, in a lot of cases, don't know that they could be doing something productive with their time. And even if they know it exists, they haven't been shown the value in that. And I think that's a big thing that staff members could do better. They could encourage, residents in a prison, inmates, to find a better way to value something that could benefit their life. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That makes, I mean, it's what you're talking about, I think, just as I'm interpreting it, is that people really need to just think differently about what they're about to do. That a lot of people were maybe raised in with what they call the code of the street, that the reason they got in prison was for violence or something, but they learned that growing up in a dangerous environment where you can't trust the police, and so they'll take the law into their own hands, and then they shoot somebody and go to prison. They take that same mentality with them to prison, and when they get there, someone looked at me funny. Is he going to attack me? I should attack him first. And that if you could intervene at the beginning of the prison sentence instead of waiting till the last 6 months before they're released, and you could give them some type of really valuable cognitive behavioral therapy, some kind of treatment to give them a different mindset going in, they could avoid all kinds of problems. And I'm sure that you probably met people who were serving 2 or 3 years. They end up getting in a serious fight, and they get time added, and they stay even longer. And you think this perpetual cycle.